Hello everybody, it's jrobi. I'm going to try something a little different for this video series, and it's called Chess Challenge number 1, Play the Grandmaster. And the general idea is for you to play the moves in a Grandmaster game. In other words, throughout the video I'm going to ask you to kind of pause the video and guess the Grandmaster's move. For every move that you guess correctly, you'll get a point. And I recommend you keep tally of your points, of course, as you progress, so you get a total at the end, and then there'll be some categories to look at. And if you can, use a real chess set to play through the game. Alternatively, of course, you could use chess software to move through it, but definitely don't have your chess engine running while you're going through the exercise, because that totally defeats the purpose. Now, sometimes there will be bonus points for good moves that you see that the Grandmaster didn't play. If you think that there should have been another bonus point move that I might have missed, feel free to comment. And as long as the move either maintains the strength of the position or improves the position, it'll count for a bonus point. Now, the inspiration for this video series came from a few sources. There's a practice exercise known as solitaire chess that's very similar to this, although it's not in video format. And you know, in general, it's very useful to go through Grandmaster games to study, but I thought that this would be a good way to add some fun to that. And you know, unlike a lot of other people, my memory isn't photographic, to say the least. So I'm hoping that as time goes on and I add more to this series, that I can come back to the older ones and you know, play them through again. But anyway, let's get started here. So the first game that we're going to take a look at took place in 1898, and it was between Chigorin playing white and Steinitz playing black. Now, you'll be playing from the white side of the board for this video. And Chigorin was a very famous Russian chess grandmaster. He's often credited with laying much of the foundation for the Soviet school of chess. Steinitz, on the other hand, was playing black in this game, and he was the first world chess champion. Now, Chigorin defeated Steinitz in this game, so let's see if you can guess his moves as we progress. Now, this is the starting position where the points are going to start to count, but I'm going to flip back to the beginning of the game just so you can see how we got to this point. So the game started out with white playing pawn to e4, black plays pawn up to e5, white develops knight to f3, black brings the knight out to c6, and now white brings the pawn to c3, and from here black pushes now with pawn to d5. So from this point on, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and see if you can correctly guess the Grandmaster's next move. Now, if you're familiar with this line that we're showing so far in the video, you'll probably get some points early on, and that's fine. Like, I mean, if you know your opening lines and you're getting points out of the opening for guessing the correct moves, that's, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So we're going to get started here. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with the move that the Grandmaster played in this position. Now I'm going to continue on here. So the Grandmaster played queen to a4, and queen to a4 is serving a couple things. First of all, it's pinning the knight down here on c6, and it's also giving this pawn here on e4 a defender, just in case black decides to take that pawn. But from this position, black decided to play pawn up to f6. So go ahead and pause the video again, see if you can come up with the move that white played in this position. And actually, in this position, there's two good moves that you can get a point for. The move that was played in the game was bishop to b5. So if you guess bishop to b5, go ahead and give yourself another point. Bishop to b5, of course, is doubling up here on this pin on the knight, pinning it down to the king, giving two attackers here on the c6 square, while maintaining, again, a defender here on e4 for the pawn. The other good move in this position, you might have guessed, would have been d3. Now, d3, of course, is supporting the pawn on e4 as well, and the queen is allowed to stay on a4, maintaining that pin on that knight. So if you got any of those moves, any of those two moves, go ahead and give yourself a point. Now, this line here with d3, I'm not going to go too far into it, but you might have thought of something like d3, black might respond bishop to e6, and then white could play bishop to e2. But let's go back to bishop to b5, which is what white played. Now, in this position here, facing these threats, black decided to play pawn takes here on e4. So go ahead, pause the video again, see if you can come up with the move that white played in this position. Now, it might be tempting to think about taking with the queen here on e4, because we did talk a little bit about how the queen was defending the pawn on e4 in case it got captured. But if you think a few moves ahead of this, it turns out that this definitely doesn't get a point because it hurts white's position a little bit. Up to this point, white has been building up and mounting the pressure on the black position. But unfortunately, queen to e4 lets black play knight to e7, and all of a sudden white is not going to be setting the pace of the game anymore. White could try something like d4, but then black has bishop to f5, and all of a sudden white is kind of worrying about defending pieces, and definitely doesn't have the pressure that white was building up earlier on. So if we go back to pawn takes here on e4, the point is going to be gained if you came up with the move bishop takes here on c6. Now, bishop takes on c6 is obviously putting the king into check, so black has to do something about that. So black takes with the pawn here on c6. And go ahead, pause the video, see if you can come up with the move. But from this position here, white opted to take the pawn now with check on c6. Of course, black doesn't want to block this check with the queen because then the rook will fall. But also going on here is that the queen is not only attacking the rook, but it's also attacking the pawn here on e4. So from here, black decides to block the check with the bishops to defend the rook. You can go ahead and pause the video for white's next move. And if you see it and come up with it, it's just simply queen takes here on e4. So if you guessed queen takes on e4, give yourself another point. From here now, black decided to play knight out to e7. And go ahead, pause the video again, and see if you can come up with a Grandmaster move in this position. From here, Chigorin decided to play pawn up to d4, and this is of course attacking the pawn on e5. It's also, gaining a little bit of control of the c5 square, and making a play for the center of the board. Black's pieces definitely aren't quite as coordinated for a center assault as white's. For example, the queen on d8 is blocked in now currently by the white light square bishop. And black's dark square bishop over on f8 is, of course, blocked in by the knight. So Chigorin obviously saw the opportunity here to make a good play for the center and did so with pawn to d4. So if you saw that push, definitely give yourself a point. And from here, black responded with bishop to c6. Now the bishop, of course, is attacking the queen. Good, nice move here from black to try to alleviate the tension. So go ahead, pause the video, see if you can come up with white played in this position. From here, white plays queen back to e2. Now I like this move when I first saw it because queen to e2, of course the queen has to be saved, so you probably got an easy point there. But it's also taken away the b5 square away from the light square bishop of black's. So that bishop can't quite get to that square yet. Doesn't have the support necessary to do it because the queen's defending that square. So black can't, say for example, try to stop white from castling, or just take advantage of that nice light square diagonal. So facing this, black decided to play pawn up to e4, attacking the knight here on f3. So go ahead, pause the video again, and see if you can come up with white's response here to this move. From here, white decided to play knight over to d2. So obviously removing the knight from f3 where it was being attacked. But now all of a sudden we have two attackers now on the e4 square. So black had to reply to that, and black plays queen to d5. So pause the video again, see if you can come up with white's best move in this position. Now from here, white decided simply to castle, so to get the king in a little bit more of a safe position. So if you select castling as your move of choice in that position, go ahead and give yourself a point. And from here, black returns the favor and castles on the queen side. Now, generally in chess, if you have castling taking place on the opposite side, so either you castle on your king side and your opponent goes on the queen side, or you go on your queen side and your opponent goes on the king side, generally the play that follows is quite aggressive and very tactical. So this game is definitely shaping up to be a slugfest, so to speak. So go ahead and pause the video again, see if you can come up with white's best move in this position. But from here, white decided to simply play rook over to e1. So if you saw rook to e1, definitely give yourself a point. And basically what this move is doing, obviously, is supporting the queen along the e file. And now we have three attackers on the pawn on e4. So black definitely has to do something about that. And black decides to move pawn up to f5, giving that pawn on e4 another defender, basically solidifying that square and preventing white from just taking that pawn off of the board. Now the question is, what did white play in this position in response to that? So go ahead, pause the video. But white came up with the move pawn up to f3. So if you saw the move pawn to f3 and you decided that would be your play, definitely give yourself a point. Now all of a sudden, again, we have more attackers on the e4 square, and black's response to this was to move the rook over now to the e file. So the rook is moved over to e8. So basically, once this knight moves off of e7, the rook will be able to exert its influence along the e file and support the center that black has built up from this position. So go ahead and pause the video now and see if you can come up with white's next move in the position. Now there's actually a couple moves here that white can play that can get you a point. The one that was played in the game is just with the pawn taking here on e4, and obviously the pawn is attacking the queen. It's also attacking the pawn on f5. So it's like black is just a little bit behind because of that knight sitting on e7 blocking that rook. Chigorin took the opportunity to just capture. But there was another move in this position, so if I flip back here one move, you might have also seen queen to f2. So if you came up with queen to f2, give yourself a point as well. Play could continue as follows from here. Pawn captures on f3 and knight recaptures, and white's going to have a good game from this position as well. So if you came up with queen to f2, go ahead and give yourself a point. But nonetheless, the move that was played in the game was pawn takes here on e4. So if you got that one, give yourself a point as well. From here now, black responded pawn takes on e4. So go ahead, pause the video, see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. White played an interesting move, knight to a3, and I'm not going to talk much about it because I don't want to give away the future moves that come here. But if you got that move, go ahead and give yourself a point. I definitely didn't think of that when I was looking at the position, so if you did, that's awesome. But from here, black decided to play knight over to f5, and of course this is getting the knight away from the rook. So the rook now is influencing the square here on e4. So go ahead, pause the video, see if you can come up with white's best move in this position. But white came up with the move knight over to c2, and now all of a sudden the knight to a3 makes a lot of sense. So that knight was being rerouted now to influence some more squares closer to the center. So it was a nice little play by Chigorin to get that knight more active in the position, because when the knight was sitting there on b1, it really wasn't accomplishing a great deal. So that was a nice move there. So if you saw knight to c2, definitely give yourself a point. And I would even say if you came up with the whole a3 c2 thing, you should give yourself one more point. So for those two moves, if you got them both, give yourself 3 points, because I think that's a nice little move that Chigorin played there. So if you saw that, awesome. But from this position here, black pushes the pawn up to h5. And go ahead and pause the video, see if you can come up with white's next best move in this position. But there's actually a couple moves at white's disposal here. What was played in the game here was knight to f1. And knight to f1, if you saw that, give yourself a point. But it's a nice little move. It's targeting the e3 square, which is going to be attacking the queen, also blockading that pawn on e4. And it's definitely a good move. But if I flip back one, if you came up with the move c4, give yourself a point as well, because that pawn's supported by the queen and the knight, and it's attacking the enemy queen. So when the queen falls back to say e6, white has knight to b3, and white's going to have a good position to work with. But nonetheless, knight to f1 was played in the position, and from here, black plays knight to h4. So pause the video again and see if you can come up with white's best move in this position. And once again, white has a couple options at its disposal. What was played in the game was bishop to f4. So if you got that move, definitely go ahead and give yourself a point. It's a good move. It's developing the bishop that wasn't really doing a lot on c1, and the bishop has a lot of good options from that position. But once again, if we flip back a move, c4 again was another good move in this position. So if you got c4 instead of bishop to f4, go ahead and give yourself a point. But nonetheless, bishop to f4 was played, and from here, black plays the knight up to g6. Now, go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's play in this position. But for me, at my level of chess, I'm still learning a great deal about chess, and I still have a lot left to learn. But the tendency would be here to think about that bishop immediately on f4 and how it's being attacked by the knight, and the bishop doesn't have a defender. But these are grandmasters playing the game, and there's a nice little intermediate move here that the grandmaster came up with. So if you saw queen to a6 check, give yourself a point, because obviously the bishop can't be taken now because the king is in check. So it's a nice little move here that's getting the queen very close to the enemy king. And it's also a good move because now if the bishop were to be used to block the check by moving to b7, the knight falls here on g6. So black has to be careful in this position and plays the king over to b8. So go ahead and pause the video, see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. But there's two good good options. The one that was played in the game was knight to e3. And I like this move not only because it's attacking the queen on d5, and that queen is the only defender of the bishop, but look at these possible jump points in the future for the knight. Now I'm going to say right off the bat that the next move that we look at for white is not one of those knight moves, because I guess in the future when I make these videos I shouldn't highlight squares like that. But when I first saw the move, that really jumped out to me, and I thought it was a really good move. Another good option for white in this position, if we go back a move, is once again to play c4. So if you saw c4 again in that position, you can give yourself a point as well. But nonetheless, the move that was played was knight to e3. And to reply to this, black played the queen over to e6. That's basically the only move that stops that bishop from falling. So go ahead and pause the video, see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. But from here, white came up with bishop takes on c7. So obviously this is putting the king in check. It's getting the bishop out of that dangerous area that it was on f4. Obviously it was being attacked by the knight still. And it almost seems like white is giving back the material and in fact going to be behind a little bit of material after this move. But as the game progresses, you'll see that that doesn't turn out to be the case. So black from this position played the best move here, which is king takes bishop on c7. So go ahead and pause the video, see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. So from here, white pushes the pawn up now to d5, forking the bishop and the queen. And if you saw pawn to d5, go ahead and give yourself a point. But from this position, obviously the only move for black here is to capture that pawn with the bishop. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. From here, Chigorin came up with a nice move and played queen now to a5 check. So if you saw that, go ahead and give yourself a point. But now black is facing a number of threats. First of all, the king is in check, obviously, but the bishop on d5 is being attacked by two pieces now and only has one defender, which is the queen. So black tried to come up with a move that meets both of those threats at the same time. Now I'm not going to say exactly why it seemingly meets both of these threats at the same time, because it'll give away the next move. But from this position, black plays queen now to b6. So if in the comments, if you can see what black was thinking and how this might have possibly met both threats, go ahead and post that. But from here, if you want, pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. It's fairly straightforward though, so you probably got it, and it's just now queen taking that bishop here on d5. So if you saw that, go ahead and give yourself a point. And congratulations on once again gaining a material advantage in the game from white's perspective, because now white is ahead a pawn. So what did black do in this position? Well, black developed this last minor piece and brought the bishop up now to d6. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. But from here, white just decided to contribute to the attack a little bit more and played knight up to d4. So if you saw knight to d4, give yourself a point. And as you can see here, the amount of pieces that white has close to the black king is just building up, and black is in a very, very dangerous position here. And black decided to play the move knight to f4, attacking the queen. So go ahead and pause the video now and see if you can come up with white's response to this. But white decided to play now knight to b5 check. So that knight is now jumping off of d4, landing the check. The knight's protected by the queen, obviously. And as we can see here, all of white's pieces are going to be able to contribute to the attack very quickly. By moving the knight here from d4 to b5, the d file is opening up for white's rooks. The knight on e3 could be a major player eventually in the game, and of course the white queen is close to the enemy king as well. So once again, if you saw knight to b5 check, go ahead and give yourself a point. And from here, black plays king over to d7. So pause the video and see if you can come up with white's response to king to d7. From here, white's next move was queen over to f5, hitting again another check on the enemy king. So if you saw queen to f5 for check, go ahead and give yourself a point. From here, black decided to make the move king now to d8, and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. But basically from here, white decided to play the move knight takes here on d6. So if you saw knight captures on d6, go ahead and give yourself a point. From here, black's response was to recapture, obviously, with the queen. And from here now, what would you play as white in this position? So go ahead and pause the video and come up with white's next move in this position. From here, white decided to play now knight over to c4, attacking the queen and getting that knight off of the e3 square. It's been sitting there for quite a while due to the pin that it was under. So if you saw knight knight to c4, attacking the queen, go ahead and give yourself a point. Now from here, black responded queen over to c6. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. From here, the Grandmaster decided to play queen takes on f4. So if you saw that, go ahead and give yourself a point. The Grandmaster's basically taking the knight on f4 and leaving the knight on c4, on pre. In other words, it's under attack. It's going to be captured, which was black's next move, was to take that knight. So go ahead and pause the video now and see if you can come up with white's next move. Now in this position, there's a couple of good moves actually. The one that was played in the game was rook over to d1 check. So if you saw rook over to d1, go ahead and give yourself a point. But there was another move in the position. I'm just going to flip back one move here. The other move, which was a little bit stronger, and if you came up with this, definitely give yourself a point, was queen over to b8, hitting the check on the king. So if you saw that, go ahead and give yourself a point. And play could continue as follows. The king could go to e7, and the queen will snag up the pawn on a7, hitting the check again. And when the king now goes to f6, the rook can swing over and grab control of the d file. So if you saw queen to b8, definitely go ahead and give yourself a point. But nonetheless, in the game, rook to d1, hitting the check was played, so you can get a point for that as well. So from here, black's response to this was to move the king over now to c8. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move in this position. White continued in an aggressive stance here, though, and played the rook up now to d4. So it's attacking the queen, still maintaining control, of course, of the d file, and if you saw that, definitely give yourself a point. From here, the black queen retreats back now to c5, and the question is, how does white continue from this position? So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's next move. But basically what Chigorin came up with here is rook captures pawn on e4. So if you saw that, go ahead and give yourself a point. But a little bit more material now is in white's favor, because now white's up 2 pawns in the position. From here, black decided to play rook over to f8, attacking the queen, and go ahead and pause the video again and see if you can come up with white's best move in this position. From here, white plays the move queen to e3. So this is obviously doing a couple of things. It's breaking that pin on the rook on d4, and it's also maintaining the defense of the rook on e4. So it's a good move. So if you saw that, go ahead and give yourself a point. And now black plays rook captures on e4. I don't even think you really need to pause in this position, but go ahead and do so if you're using a chess set. And from here, white's next move obviously is queen captures now on e4. So give yourself a point for that as well. So from here now, black decided to play the move pawn push now to a5. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with the move that white used to continue on with the attack here. But there's 2 good moves here for white in this position. The one that was played in the game was queen to e3. So if you saw queen to e3, go ahead and give yourself a point. Queen to e3 is obviously liberating the rook here from that pin that it was under with the black queen on c5, pinning it down to the king. But another move in the position that was even a little bit stronger in this position, if we go back one move, was queen to d5. And you might have thought of the play continuing as follows. So after queen to d5, rook could come down to f5, queen can hit the check, king goes over now to b8, and then the queen snags up the pawn here on g7. So you might have thought that would be a good line to follow. So if you came up with queen to d5, go ahead and give yourself a point. But in the game, queen to e3 was the move that was played. So from here now, black continues queen over to f5. So the queen and the rook are now doubled up on the f file, bearing down towards the castle position of the white king. And go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with white's best move in this position. Chigorin actually saw the best move here and played h3. So if you saw h3, go ahead and give yourself a point. Definitely a good solid move in the position, given the fact that the queen and the rook are bearing down, and basically, putting a solid control over the g4 square. So that can't be used in the future, at least in the short term, by the enemy queen, maybe to get diagonal access into the position. So from here now, black continues pushing the pawn up now to g5. So black has obviously made the decision to go all out here on the assault. But go ahead and pause the video now and see if you can find a good move for white in this position. From here, white plays the move rook over to c4, hitting the check with the rook. Now, if you saw that, obviously go ahead and give yourself a point. Black decided to move the king over to b7, and pause the video again and see if you can see how white continues the attack here. So from here, white decided to play the rook up now to c5, forking both the pawn and the queen. So if you saw rook to c5, go ahead and give yourself a point. And from here, black played the queen up now to d7. So once again, pause the video, and what would you play in this position? Interestingly enough, white did not go to take the pawn right away and instead played queen up to e4, hitting the check. So if you saw queen to e4 hitting the check, go ahead and give yourself another point. Black's response to this was to move the king now down to b6. So pause the video and see if you can come up with the continuation for white. But in this position, white played the rook over now to d5, attacking the queen. So if you saw that, give yourself another point. And from here now, black decided to play queen over to c8, so getting the queen out of danger. So once again, pause the video and see if you can come up with the next move for white. And interestingly enough, there's two good moves for white in this position. The one that was played in the game was queen over to d4, hitting the check. So if you saw queen to d4 with check, give yourself a point. But I'm going to flip back a move here. And there was a much stronger move in this position, and it was queen to e3 check. So if you saw queen to e3 check, definitely go ahead and give yourself a point. But play could continue as follows. King could go to b7. The queen could hit the check here. The queen could block here on c7. Rook goes over, checks the king. King goes over now to a6, and there goes the queen. And it just gets worse actually from here, because once the king recaptures the rook, the white pawn is pushed up to a4. King retreats back to a6, and then we have a check, and now the rook falls. So that was a very strong line opportunity here for white. So if you came up with queen to e3 check, thinking at least somewhat into that line, definitely give yourself a point for that. But nonetheless, in the game, it was queen to d4 check that was played. And the play continued as follows. The king went to b7. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with the last move that the Grandmaster played in this game. And it was simply rook takes on a5, and black resigned. But there's also a bonus point here, because I'm just going to flip the position back one move. There's also the strong move rook to d7 check. And if you saw that, definitely go ahead and give yourself a point as well, because after rook to d7 check, when the queen takes the rook, the queen just falls outright, and play just, obviously gets very messy from this point for black, and it's a hopelessly lost position. But nonetheless, the move that was played in the game, and actually the last move that was played in the game, was rook capturing here on a5. So it definitely was a good game, and I enjoyed making this video, especially with the new challenge format. Unfortunately, I was so excited to make the video, I forgot to write down my own point total. So when I make the next one in this series, I'm going to write mine down before I make the video and share my total points right at the beginning, so you can know how I did before you begin the challenge yourself. So take care, hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.